Another explosion separates the rock from the cliff. In the quarry under the scorching sun, the prisoners are smashing huge boulders. One of them, John Rambo, is ordered to stop swinging the hammer. He has a visitor. The former Special Forces operative accustomed to hard labor reluctantly takes a pause from his work. He follows the warden and at the fence meets his old acquaintance, Colonel Trautman. Under his command, Rambo went through the Vietnam War and later agreed to surrender to the authorities alive. The colonel has long been looking for an opportunity to get his soldier out of prison, and the day has finally come. After asking the guard to leave them alone, Trautman explains that the government needs Rambo's help again. There are American soldiers still held captive in Vietnam. They are kept in the very camp that Rambo managed to escape from. No one knows the terrain better than the veteran, and only he can accomplish the mission. His task will be to infiltrate the enemy's site and find out how many U.S. citizens are still in captivity. John, as usual, doesn't say much. He's become disillusioned with American ideals a long time ago, and returning to the place where he was brutally tortured doesn't seem like the best idea. But even in his homeland, he would still have to toil behind bars for another 5 years. Trautman understands what Rambo really needs. He will be temporarily reinstated in the army, and if the soldier completes the mission and survives, he will receive a presidential pardon. John agrees. The colonel informs him that the next time they meet will be in Thailand at a military base. Soon the prisoner gets transported to a U.S. base in Thailand. The helicopter is met by a chatty Erickson, who says that he is honored to work with Rambo. They make their way inside, where they meet Colonel Trautman and Marshal Murdoch. The man greets John cautiously. His record and honors are impressive, but will he follow orders after the shootout he had with the police? To establish trust between them, Murdoch reveals that he too has served in Vietnam. He gives his battalion number and says he lost a lot of good friends. According to intelligence reports, 2,500 U.S. citizens are still missing. Their families demand to know if they're alive. Rambo's task will be to sneak into the enemy base in order to get photos of the prisoners of war. Any armed confrontations are strictly forbidden. The political situation has changed, and to launch a military operation, hard evidence is needed. If Rambo provides it, Colonel Trautman's unit will be sent to free the prisoners. Later, Trautman explains that Rambo will first have to jump with a parachute from an altitude of 250 feet. For the mission, he will be provided with more equipment than usual. The colonel advises Rambo to use it instead of relying solely on muscle and melee weapons. The soldier is also shown the headquarters, full of expensive equipment that will work for him. At the drop-off point, he will need to meet with the local agent, Kove. Murdoch assures Rambo that he has nothing to worry about. His life will be reliably protected by the latest technologies. To that, John only makes sarcastic remarks. There's no such thing as being safe in Vietnam. Murdoch gets nervous and calls Trautman over. The colonel assures him that he has complete confidence in Rambo, the best soldier of the Vietnam War.
A pure fighting machine with only a desire to win a war that someone else lost.
He won't hesitate to sacrifice his life if that's what it takes. Before leaving, John sharpens his faithful combat knife, loads his automatic rifle, and takes exploding arrowheads. The colonel escorts the soldier and wishes him good luck. He will have 36 hours to complete the task. Afterward, he must proceed to the extraction point. In parting, Rambo tells Trautman that Murdoch has lied about his combat experience. His battalion was based in a different area. John trusts only the colonel and will probably not obey anyone else's orders. Erickson takes off into the sky. Murdoch and Trautman watch the plane fly away. Marshall remarks that Rambo is unlikely to locate the prisoners. The purpose of the mission is to reassure the public, not to rescue American soldiers. But John is determined to prove the contrary. Soon it's time to bail out. Rambo jumps out of the plane, but his expensive equipment immediately fails him. He continues to hold on to the parachute slings as the plane drags him along. The soldier is about to be sucked into the engine. Murdoch panics and orders to abort the mission. But Rambo manages to pull out his combat knife and drop the heavy backpack. Almost all of his equipment falls into the jungle. The soldier unhooks from the plane and flies through the night sky. No longer able to track his movement and status, Murdoch wants to cancel the extraction. Trautman convinces him to wait for Rambo at the rendezvous point as initially planned. Meanwhile, John lands and advances without baggage. Because of the failed landing, he will have to spend more time and energy to get to the site. All he has with him are knives, arrows, and a bow. He deftly navigates through the jungle, avoiding snakes. Following the compass, he reaches the meeting point with the agent. There, he notices a stranger wearing a Vietnamese hat. To avoid taking any chances, Rambo sneaks up behind the man and takes him prisoner. Except it turns out to be a young woman, the very agent Kove. She leads him to the river, informing him that the camp with the prisoners of war has been empty for a long time. Rambo made his journey for nothing. They reach the base of local pirates. With their help, it will be easier to hide from the military. The situation is tense, but the transfer of money for their services proceeds smoothly. Everybody gets in a boat and sails upstream. Rambo asks how the pirates deal with the patrol boats. In response, the gang leader shows him a Soviet rocket launcher. On the way, Kove asks Rambo about his past and why he decided to return to Vietnam. John doesn't reveal a lot of information. The girl has a talisman around her neck that brings her luck. In return, John shows her his talisman. the combat knife. In the meantime, Trautman intends to move with his group to the extraction point in order to meet Rambo there in time. Murdoch tries to put spokes in his wheels. The man clearly doesn't care about the soldier's fate. The colonel insists and manages to persuade the marshal. After sunset, Rambo and Kove disembark at the prisoner of war camp. From the looks of it, there are no prisoners here, and it's very quiet. They cautiously move closer and see a young woman approaching the guards to spend the night with them. Rambo assembles his bow to sneak inside the camp. Kove talks him out of it, since the orders were only to take pictures. John, of course, doesn't care about such orders. He cuts the wire on the fence with the knife and hides in the shadows of the shacks. The prisoners are nowhere to be seen. Rambo goes farther and farther, crossing a small river. Suddenly, he hears soft moans from a structure in the distance. Indeed, here he discovers Americans who are held in a cramped room with rats. They are badly emaciated, and some have a fever. Outside, Rambo finds an American named Banks, who was crucified on the trees, and frees him. They sneak past the guards on the bridge, but one Vietnamese man walks right towards them. John takes him out with a throwing knife. The next enemy soldier who shines a light on them gets shot with an arrow. Kove is also spotted by a guard, but he doesn't have time to raise the alarm. The guy gets pierced by another aptly fired arrow. The three saboteurs leave the camp, and Rambo promises to return for the others. In the morning, the Vietnamese find the bodies of their comrades in arms and set off on the trail of the fugitives. Banks is exhausted, and they stop to rest. He says that John showed up just in time. The captives are constantly transported from place to place and forced to harvest crops.
When was the last time you were in that camp?
A year. Yeah. What year is it anyway?
The answer shocks Banks. 10 years have passed since the official end of the war. The trio reaches the river and boards the pirates' boat. They must cross a mile until the extraction point. Trautman and Erickson are already there. The Vietnamese spot the boat and send a transmission to get it intercepted. A patrol boat shows up in front of the fugitives. At the same time, the pirates take the weapon from Rambo, intending to turn the trio over to the authorities. Once again, John relies on throwing knives, with which he kills the pirate and gets his weapon back. After gunning down the tricksters, he commands his teammates to jump off the boat. The patrol boat is already firing at it. Rambo falls to the deck of the boat and miraculously survives the machine gun fire. Afterwards, he retrieves the pirate's rocket launcher and blows up the pursuers. The patrol boat catches fire, but continues to sail forward, threatening to ram their boat. But as John tries to escape, he gets caught by a surviving villain. He throws a noose around Rambo's neck and holds him aboard. The soldier is once again saved by his combat knife, and he manages to dive into the water before the collision. Rambo meets up with the others on the shore and heads off into the jungle. As he approaches the rendezvous point, he says goodbye to Kove. The girl asks John not to consider himself expendable. But in the rice field, Rambo and Banks are spotted by the military. They start firing mortars at them, and the Americans can barely dodge the shells. Erickson and Trautman spot them from a helicopter. With his last ounce of strength, Rambo drags the exhausted Banks after him. This is reported to Murdoch. As soon as the marshal realizes that Rambo has found a living prisoner of war, he kicks everyone out of the HQ. Left alone, Murdoch orders Erickson to cancel the operation and return to base immediately. Trautman realizes what's going on and tries to intervene. For this, he is held at gunpoint. The colonel can't do anything, and the helicopter leaves for the base. All this time, Rambo fights off the approaching enemies. Shocked, he sees the helicopter disappearing over the horizon. He and Banks are surrounded and taken prisoner. Kove watches this scene from the jungles. At the HQ, Trautman is furious. He accuses Murdoch of betrayal. With a smirk, the marshal replies that the colonel must have realized what was going on. Thus, he himself can be considered an accomplice. Murdoch doesn't deny anything. Yes, the whole mission was just for show. It was more important for the government to calm the public outcry than to save the lives of a few hundred prisoners. Rambo was supposed to return empty-handed, but he chose to disobey orders and paid for it. Nobody will miss him either. The colonel adds that it's all about money. The Vietnamese haven't released the POWs in retaliation for the US refusing to pay reparations for the war. Marshall advises Trautman to swallow his pride and think about the consequences. Had Vietnam received the money, it would have been used to wage war against America's allies. And the scandal that would arise if the POWs' faces were in the news could escalate into another war. The colonel calls the marshal a bastard and leaves. Murdoch urges him to forget both their conversation and this mission. Trautman will make a huge mistake if he interferes.
You're the one who's making the mistake.
Yeah, what mistake?
Rambo.
Meanwhile, Rambo is tortured by being placed neck deep in a cesspool. The American's body is covered with leeches, and his hands are shackled with heavy chains. Banks, on the other hand, is sent to a cage with the others. Soon a helicopter with Soviet troops headed by Lieutenant Colonel Podofsky arrives at the camp. He orders to get Rambo out, clean him up, and bring him for interrogation. Once in the room, Rambo doesn't say a word. Podofsky introduces Sergeant Yushin and puts the American's combat knife into burning coals. He plays the good cop and politely asks the prisoner to contact his superiors by radio. John needs to warn his men that any further attempts at espionage will end poorly for the Americans. Rambo tells Podofsky to go screw himself, and Yushin takes over. They start torturing the prisoner with electric shocks, but he still resists. The lieutenant colonel reads him the intercepted messages in which Murdoch orders subordinates to cancel the operation and leave John to die. Another discharge, but Rambo remains silent. At this time, Kove infiltrates the camp disguised as a girl for the guards. She is taken to a hut where she eliminates a soldier and takes possession of his weapon. Having acknowledged Rambo's willpower, the soldiers bring Banks in for questioning. With the red-hot knife, Yushin leaves a scar on John's face. He then approaches Banks and puts the blade to his eye. Despite this, the man also yells for John not to assist the enemy. Rambo can't stand it and accepts the terms. He is placed in front of a microphone, and the American gets on the line with the HQ. Kove hears the American speak and approaches the hut. At the base, Murdoch and Trautman hear Rambo's voice. They ask the fighter about his condition, and John requests Murdoch to speak with him.
Murdoch, I'm coming to get you.
He then grabs the microphone and attacks the soldiers. Kove opens fire from below, piercing the floor with a machine gun burst. Rambo electrocutes Yushin and jumps outside, grabbing his knife. Together with Kove, they shoot back at their pursuers and make it to the fence. John helps the girl slip through the barbed wire, and they hide in the jungle. Helicopters and ATVs are sent after them, but this is not the first time Rambo has evaded such a pursuit. He leads Kove after him, and they escape death. In the morning, the girl helps dress the man's wounds. John thanks her. He will always remember that she did not abandon him in captivity. The American plans to cross the Thai border and then return to his homeland. She asks to take her with them to America and kisses Rambo. They set off on their journey, but immediately run into an ambush. Kove gets hit with a burst of machine gun fire. Enraged, Rambo retaliates and shoots the attackers. Yet one of them manages to get away. John hopes to save Kove, but the girl dies in his arms.
You not forget me.
No.
At the HQ, Trautman again demands that a rescue mission be sent. He threatens to start acting on his own, so Murdoch orders to take the colonel under arrest. Meanwhile, Rambo puts Kove's pendant around his neck and buries her body in the woods. Now, he won't stop at simply getting the prisoners out. The Soviets and Vietnamese military continue looking for him. Rambo hides in the thicket and kills them one by one. Most of the time, he uses a bow and knife so as not to attract unnecessary attention. John hides in mud and water to catch the people who are after him off guard. He runs through a local village, leading his pursuers into another trap. Rambo grabs gas cans and walks into a field. The military follows him and soon find themselves in a ring of fire. Rambo pulls out his explosive arrows and unleashes his wrath on the enemies. Chaos ensues as the soldiers scatter. John also tracks down the man who killed Kove and managed to escape earlier. He shoots an arrow at him, and the scoundrel gets blown to bits by an explosion. Suddenly, a helicopter with Yushin on board appears in the sky. It drops a bomb on Rambo, but the soldier manages to dive into a lake. The Russians descend, trying to pierce the man with bullets. John jumps out of the water, climbing onto the helicopter. He and Yushin engage in hand-to-hand combat in the cockpit. The helicopter soars into the air, and the big man grabs Rambo by the neck. John manages to get the upper hand and throws his opponent out of the aircraft. The pilot is the next to go. Rambo flies the captured helicopter to the camp and attacks it with bombs. The huts and equipment are blown up. John skillfully handles the machine gun as well, destroying the soldiers. He lands and begins shooting down the guards. Rambo releases the American prisoners and leads them to the helicopter. One of them gets wounded by a Soviet soldier, but John quickly kills the last enemy. He takes off to take the Americans to a base in Thailand. They are pursued in a huge attack helicopter by Podofsky. He fires from all guns, and Rambo has to maneuver the chopper to avoid crashing down on a civilian village. A missile severely damages the fugitive's aircraft. Rambo manages to land the burning helicopter in the shallows of the river. Podofsky flies closer and sees that the American is sitting at the helm, unconscious. Anticipating his victory, the lieutenant colonel prepares to fire the last shell. Suddenly, Rambo wakes up and fires his grenade launcher. The enemy helicopter is blown to pieces. John lifts the damaged machine into the air and contacts the base. Murdoch leaves the room in a panic, and Trautman orders to meet Rambo. John must hurry to save the wounded. He manages to land the helicopter and immediately arms himself with an M60 machine gun. His first step is to approach Erickson.
Glad you made it!
Trautman says nothing to the soldier, letting him enter Murdoch's command center. Inside, Rambo fires a huge clip, destroying all the high-tech equipment. He goes into the marshal's office and pulls out his knife. Murdoch tries to justify his actions by saying that he too was following orders from his superiors. Murdoch is aware that there were a lot more captured American soldiers in Vietnam. John demands that the marshal deal with the problem. Rambo goes outside where the doctors are already helping the prisoners.